Okay, good morning. My name is Ludo Waldman, and I will cover the next part of this seminar today, covering the topic of preprinting and open peer review. So what Ted just discussed was all the developments ongoing to enable open access publishing of basically articles in scientific journals. Extremely important, of course, but the interesting thing is that when you look at open scholarly communication, there's also many interesting developments that go beyond the journal article, and there are a few of those that we would like to highlight today. And I will focus on preprinting and open peer review as some really important developments. So what you see over here is the idea of preprinting. So I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with the idea of preprinting, so let me briefly introduce it. This is, by the way, a picture that I took from a guide that has been developed by NWO and some other organization in the Netherlands, a guide to preprinting. So what you see is this scientist who writes a manuscript, and then at the bottom you see what normally researchers do. They submit that manuscript to a journal, and there's an editor that is handling the submission. The editor is managing the peer review process. So the manuscript is sent to peer reviewers. These people usually need quite some time to do the peer review because they're very busy. But ultimately at some point the journal will get these reviews and will be able to make a decision. So the journal might decide to reject the article if the quality is considered insufficient, or the journal might decide to publish the article. This is a process that typically takes at least a few months, sometimes even a number of years. And then, of course, we hope that at least this final outcome will be open access in the way that Ted discussed it. But preprinting is this thing that you see at the top of this diagram. So in the case of preprinting, that same manuscript that this researcher has written is submitted to what is called a preprint server, which is a public, openly available repository online. And this preprint server will do a very basic quality check, which is kind of things like, is there plagiarism, is there some very kind of obvious things in it that kind of show this is not in some sense legitimate research. But if the work passes these very basic quality checks, which typically take just 1 or 2 days, then the work will be published, or sometimes we say posted, on the preprint server. So that is a matter of, in many cases, less than 24 hours, sometimes a few days, but typically not much more than that. And as soon as the preprint is available on the preprint server, anyone can read it, because preprint servers are always openly accessible. So preprints have this major benefit of speeding up the dissemination of scientific research, accelerating the dissemination, reducing the time to disseminate the work from months or even years to just a few days. But preprint servers normally do not do peer review, and that's of course in some sense a drawback compared to what journals offer. This is an important development because preprinting has become more and more important and prominent, and that's what you see on this slide. So on this slide you see the growth in preprinting over the past 30 years. It's really impressive. So at the left you see the annual number of preprints, and you see how this has grown consistently over the past 3 decades. So basically since the start of the World Wide Web, which is of course kind of what you need to enable preprinting, we have seen this really rapid growth. And interestingly, and you see that at the right, this is not just what many people perhaps still have in mind, not just the natural sciences, physics and mathematics. These are indeed these were the early adopters of preprints. That's visible at the right. In particular, physics was very early. But nowadays it is also the life sciences. It's also to some extent the medical sciences, and to some extent the social and behavioral sciences. So we see that preprinting is being adopted more and more widely, and also throughout all the different sciences. So that is a fascinating development that is going on right now, and this is also a way in which a lot of research is being made openly accessible, not directly in the journal, but in an alternative way, in a preprint repository, and in many cases actually in a more rapid way than what journals enable, because the research can be made openly accessible prior to the peer review process. Okay. So preprinting is an important development itself in terms of making scholarly communication more open. it also enables other developments that are very interesting, and I would like to say a few things about new ways in which quality assurance can be done in a more open scholarly communication system. So quality assurance, of course, is typically done through peer review. Peer review is seen as kind of the cornerstone of how scientific publishing and quality assurance should be organized, but at the same time, peer review is also something that many researchers kind of complain about and don't feel fully comfortable with, because there's kind of an agreement that peer review is something we need, but at the same time also something that suffers from all kinds of flaws. What you see here is an article that was published 20 years ago by Fiona Godley. She has been for quite a long time the editor of the British Medical Journal, BMJ, so managing herself the peer review process for an important journal, but she has also been very critical about actually the way in which peer review is traditionally organized. So what she says here, and you see this text highlighted in yellow, she says, first, there are all kinds of problems with the peer review system, like biases and the system not being transparent, all of that. And then she says preprint servers, that's a really important force for change. That's what she said 20 years ago, which is interesting because at that time preprinting was still in an early stage. But she says this is important, especially when you combine preprint servers with open commentary. So I look forward to a time when open commentary and review replace the current flawed system of closed pre-publication peer review and its false reassurances about the reliability of what is published. Not everyone agrees with this very critical perspective on traditional peer review, but this is an example of someone who feels that we really need to do better. We need to kind of replace this traditional peer review system by a more open system. And preprint servers could play an important role in that development. Interestingly, this was 20 years ago. So now we can see what has happened over the past 2 decades, how much progress we have made. Let's take a look. So one thing that happened is that more and more journals have accepted the idea that they should not just do peer review, but they should also be transparent about how they do it. And typically they try to be transparent by showing, for the articles they publish, the review reports. So the review reports that have led to the decision to publish the article. So this is a study that was done 2 years ago, and this study is analyzing how many journals, in all different disciplines, how many journals actually adopt this form of open or transparent peer review. So what you see in the graph at the right is the increase over time in the number of journals adopting open or transparent peer review, which in most cases means that these journals publish the review reports. Sometimes it's also about publishing names of reviewers, but mostly this is about the actual content of the review reports. And the interesting thing, of course, is what happens in the most recent years. A really large growth, starting from 2017, large growth in the adoption of open peer review. So this is becoming more and more accepted. Just to show you how this works, this is a randomly chosen journal by Wiley. Wiley has actually put quite a lot of effort into making peer review more transparent. So this is an article in the journal, and you see in the article there's a link to peer review. These peer review reports are on a platform that's called Publons, and in Publons you can actually read what the reviewers wrote. In this case you can even see the names of the reviewers. That's not always the case, because sometimes reviewers want to remain anonymous, but at least the content of the reviews is visible. So this is transparency. This enables readers to understand why a journal chose to publish a particular piece of research. It also enables researchers or readers to understand whether perhaps there are still some weaknesses in the article, weaknesses that have been identified by reviewers and that have not been fully addressed by authors. Another example, this is eLife. So eLife is another publisher, quite a progressive publisher. So this is an article in eLife. What you see is they publish the article, but they also publish an editor's evaluation, showing again why the decision to publish the article was made. You can then also see the underlying communication between the editor and the authors, so the decision letter and things like that. And you can even go one level deeper and see the individual review reports that the reviewers provided. So again, like we saw for Wiley, all this information is made openly available in an attempt to be transparent and to be accountable. Okay. So that's open peer review, but this is open peer review in the context of journals. So this is journals that try to be more transparent and to show what kind of peer review they do and how they make decisions to publish certain research. But let's now go back to this development of preprinting. So preprinting actually is interesting because it enables completely new ways of doing peer review outside the traditional journal system. So we see here all kinds of initiatives on this slide that are about organizing peer review outside the journal system and organizing peer review directly around these preprints. So normally preprints have this kind of limitation that they don't have, that they haven't undergone any significant quality control, no quality assurances can be made. However, more and more you see these new forms of peer review organized around preprints to actually address that limitation of preprints and at the same time potentially also to offer an alternative to the traditional way in which journals organize preprinting. So we see Review Commons, for instance, is one such initiative, peer review around preprints. Peer Community In is another one, which is a system that in some sense is quite similar to what journals do, but it's all organized around preprints rather than around articles submitted to journals. There's also the COVID pandemic that has led to some of these innovations. So there's, for instance, something that is called Rapid Reviews COVID-19. It's a platform that publishes reviews for articles about COVID that have been posted on preprint servers. The authors don't even need to ask for this, it just happens. So the authors submit their work to the preprint server, and this platform, they just decide, we are going to review this because we feel this is relevant, important research and it needs to go through some further quality assessment. Also interestingly, you see now that funders start to acknowledge this as legitimate, valid ways of disseminating scientific research and also organizing quality control. So you see, for instance, EMBO as a funder, they have taken that step. The step of saying that a preprint with peer review reports is in some sense kind of equivalent to a journal article, and that's how they look at it in their own assessment procedures for postdoctoral fellowships. Funders are also doing interesting things. This is Wellcome Trust. You probably know this. They have their own platform, Wellcome Open Research, like some other funders also do. And these platforms essentially, they offer something that is a kind of a mixture of a preprint server and a journal. But what they do is they provide the opportunity to make research immediately openly available prior to peer review, and then they offer fully open, transparent peer review. This is actually something I published myself on this Wellcome peer review platform, and you can see that at the right there are review reports. Some reviewers, they say, well, this is quite okay, but there's also a reviewer who feels, no, this is not good, so a red cross. It's all transparent and you can see it, and you can actually read why the reviewers perhaps don't like my work or why they disagree with me, and I can respond to them. It's all open. So, lots of things are happening, many opportunities to organize scholarly communication in new, more open ways, even beyond the traditional journal article. So just to summarize, we have seen this development of preprints of research articles becoming more and more essentially the norm, the way in which dissemination is done. First preprinting the article, then submitting it to a journal. It's definitely not something that everyone is already doing, but more and more you see that researchers take this approach. Publication of peer review reports, I showed you, this is getting more and more support as well. More and more journals adopt this, more and more journals choose to publish the peer reviews for the articles that they accept for publication in their journal. And then you have this combination of actually these other two developments, preprinting and open peer review, together offering a complete new way in which you can think about publication and quality assurance of scientific research by organizing open forms of peer review around these preprints. So that's a really interesting, important development that is in an early stage now, but that might in the coming years become more and more important.